With us today is Sir Colin Blakemore, Professor of Neuroscience and Philosophy, who this morning held a Jubilee lecture here at the Amazing Brain Symposium at Lund University. Professor Blakemore, in your speech today you walked us through different myths about the brain. Which one of these are you most eager to get rid of?
Well, since I work on vision, I study vision and have done all of my research career, seeing is believing, which was one of my myths, is the thing I'm most interested in. I think we tend to believe that everything that we see is real, it's there, that we never miss anything, that we never invent anything except in funny situations, visual illusions, for instance. We might see things which look a bit strange, but we immediately know that they look strange. So therefore we think that normal vision is absolutely reliable. Well, it's not. There's increasing evidence that we invent our vision from inside. When I started studying vision, I learned that we have eyes, the eyes receive images, the information goes into the brain, and it produces a kind of almost like a camera, produces a representation in the brain of what the eyes are seeing. It's not like that. Of course, we need eyes. If I close my eyes, I don't see anything, of course. Except if I try very hard to imagine something, then I sort of vaguely see things. And it turns out that when you try and imagine that you're seeing something, your brain, probably the frontal part of your brain, is controlling the visual parts of your brain and turning on the parts of the visual cortex that would normally be active when you're actually looking at the thing that you're imagining. So you invent the same activity from inside. And we're probably doing that all the time while we're looking at things. The brain's saying, I think that's a person, I think that's a face, and it's sending messages down saying, yes, there's probably a face. And what you see is some kind of combination of what your brain is saying you're probably going to see and what your eyes tell you you are seeing. It's much more complicated, but much more interesting.
But can we then trust what we see or experience?
Absolutely not. And actually one of the interesting applications of this discovery, this general discovery that things are not so reliable in our heads as we used to think, is that you can't trust eyewitness testimony in court as much as was in the past. I mean, it was absolutely the gold standard of evidence in court cases that a witness who was there, who saw things, who heard things, will tell you how it was, and that must be the truth, surely. Because the brain is just like a kind of, a video recording system, isn't it? Well, it's not. And not only can you miss things, but you can mix them up in your memory, in your perceptual memory, get things completely out of place, invent things that weren't there, and then embed them in your own memories so you remember them again and they become as real as a real memory. So that's been a very valuable practical application. The courts, judges, in general, the law has reduced its trust in eyewitness testimony.
Another thing we often hear is that we only use 10% of our brain.
Yeah, that was one of the myths this morning.
Yeah, you disagree.
Well, of course. In fact, if you just think about it for a second, it would be a disaster if we used all of our brain all the time. Say every nerve cell in your brain was active all the time, then how could you tell the difference between one thing and another thing? If everything that you look at activates your whole brain, then nothing will be different from anything else. So the information that's in your brain is largely there because of the absence of other activity. It's the absence of activity in the brain that defines the significance of the activity that is there. So it wouldn't work if there was too much activity, but that means that the absence is itself important. So we're using our brain all the time, even if that means that a lot of the brain has to be silent for most of the time. There's another point too, that the brain is very, very hungry. It's very greedy. The brain uses a lot of the energy in your body, the glucose and the oxygen in your blood, maybe 30%, 25%, 30% is used by the brain. It's a very, very energetically costly organ. And the reason for that is that firing a nerve impulse, which is what nerve cells do, that's how they talk to each other. So they send information around with these little electrical pulses, costs a lot of energy. Well, it actually costs a lot of energy to to recharge the neuron for the next impulse. But that means that people have estimated that at any one moment, only 3% of the neurons in your head could possibly be active. There isn't enough energy for more than that. So there's been huge pressure during evolution in keeping things as restricted as possible, being very efficient in the way that neurons are used and impulses are used. But all of the neurons have to be available for different sorts of information. So we're using it all the time.
There is this saying that you can't teach an old dog new tricks. Mm-hmm. Is that something that you disagree with?
Well, there are differences in the way that animals, dogs for instance, and people learn during their lifetime, and we begin to have some understanding of why, because the neurons of the brain pass through different phases in which they use different molecular mechanisms for learning. Basically, learning is a change in the connections in the brain. That's what it is to learn, whether it's to learn a telephone number or a new language or to play baseball, different sorts of learning, but they all involve a change in connections in the brain. And the molecular mechanisms that produce those changes differ with the age of the person. So early in life, maybe for a human being in the first 2 years, the sensory parts of the brain, the auditory bits, the visual bits, are learning passively, not actively learning, but just learning from the information which is coming in from the eyes and the ears, tuning themselves to the world, to the nature of the world. Memory, ordinary memory, remembering a phone number, remembering where you went yesterday. This is done by different related but different mechanisms in different parts of the brain, which extend over a much longer period of life, obviously, even through old age. And there are different styles of learning at different phases. So, you can't teach an old dog all the tricks, but even the oldest dog can learn some new things.
So I'd like to take this opportunity to ask if you have any advices on how to take care of our brain.
Well, it would be lovely, wouldn't it, if we knew that. And certainly, we don't have good treatments, medical treatments, drugs, to treat most of the terrible diseases of the brain, depression and schizophrenia and Alzheimer's disease, Parkinson's disease. The drugs are very, very limited in what they can achieve. So it would be great to have a way of preventing those things happening in the first place. All I can say is that get yourself the right parents is a good start. And by that I mean with the right genes, because it turns out that almost all brain diseases have some genetic contribution, but that's a bit different when you're already here, of course. But diet, there's evidence that diet is valuable, but the exact mechanisms of action of different diets on the brain is not well understood. But the obvious rules: don't eat too much red meat, fish, vegetables, that kind of thing, not too many calories. All the things that we all understand about diets apply to the brain. But the one message which has come through with very good experimental evidence is that physical exercise is crucially important. Physical exercise seems to protect the brain in so many ways. One thing we do know is that it stimulates the production of new nerve cells. Not many, but they're in the right place to be helping a particular part of the brain called the hippocampus to store memories. So this is quite an important process, the generation of small numbers of new neurons. That's acutely sensitive to many things. It's sensitive in a positive direction to exercise. If you look at new nerve cell production in a mouse, it increases dramatically if you give the mouse access to an exercise wheel, just to let it run. And there's very good evidence that's true in human beings too. Stress reduces the production of new neurons. So stress is a bad thing. Stress and exercise seem to be competing with each other. Exercise is good, stress is bad. So I think the only obvious advice is, yes, exercise. It helps to defend your brain for the future. Keep your brain active. It'd be lovely to think that doing Sudoku and doing crossword puzzles and playing chess is going to prevent you from getting Alzheimer's. I don't think so. I don't think there's really strong evidence. But it helps to keep you better at playing Sudoku and playing chess and doing crossword puzzles. So why not? The more you exercise your brain, the better you maintain that particular use of your brain. So it is good to be doing these mental exercises as well as the physical.
Well, thank you so much, Professor Blakemore, for helping us to get rid of some of the myths and giving some advice on how to take care of our brain. If you're interested in listening to Colin Blakemore's lecture, his and several others of the lectures will be available online on Lund University website after this Amazing Brain event. Thank you for watching.